palatal slide, on the palatal aspect, it is virtually impossible to displace a flap. So in order to handle palatal flaps or periodontal pockets in the palatal region, Friedman then proposed the beveled flap. So here you have the crevicular incisions that will be taken. A conventional mucoperiosteal flap would be raised. Now, depending on the osseous contour, or probably if the norm is crown lengthening, so the necessary osseous reduction is done, followed by placement of the tissue back, and that is when you have a beveled incision that is placed a few millimeters away from the gingival margin, keeping in mind the level of alveolar bone and where you want the final gingival margins to be. So this was the beveled flap by Friedman. Moving on to the papilla preservation. So this was a classic technique described by Tekai et al. In 1985 with objective of attending to osseous defects at the same time for regenerative purpose, at the same time for aesthetic reasons in the anterior zone. So it was extremely useful technique. I'm sure the regenerative techniques I'll just brush through quick because I can tell who would be including that. So quickly, sulcular incisions, and we have the semilunar incision classically taken on the palatal side about 5 mm away from the concerned the line angles of the teeth, and once that is done with the help of a blunt instrument, this papilla is pushed on and accommodated in the labial flap. In this manner, you can then gain access to the osseous areas, probably perform regeneration. And when you are closing it back, so then you close it with a cross mattress suture. Now, understanding the technicalities and the technical, or it is a technique sensitive procedure. I'm sure all of us have done it at a few points of time. So Cottolini in 1995 modified this papilla preservation to have the semilunar or the straight cut incision on the labial aspect and include the papilla on the palatal flap. So this is how the palatal flap is raised, defect debrided, graft placed, sutured, and the post-op result. In 1999, so those techniques were limited to areas where you had interdental spaces which was more than 2 millimeters. What if there were gaps between teeth which were less than 2 millimeters, where we're reflecting a classic, doing a classic papilla preservation or a modified papilla preservation would be difficult. So in those areas, Cottolini proposed the simplified technique. Now here, oblique incision in the papilla begins at the gingival margin line angle. The blade is parallel to the long axis of the tooth and reaches the midpoint of the distal surface of the adjacent tooth below the contact point. Sulcular incisions and buccal flap elevation is then done. A buccolingual horizontal incision at the base of the papilla close to the interproximal crest is made. Sulcular incisions are made on the palatal aspect and the palatal flap being reflected. And then debridement is performed and sutured accordingly. Just a minute. Right. So having understood the basic differences between the papilla preservation flap technique, the classic one, the simplified and the modified version, we then move on to the distal molar flap surgery. Now the distal molar area, especially the maxillary tuberosity, as well as the retromolar pad. Now, these are areas of significant concern as, first of all, they are the most posterior areas with minimum amount of visibility there. Zone of attached gingiva is extremely varied. In certain areas, you may have attached gingiva, while in certain areas, there could be only mucosa. So in such cases, a periodontal surgery or a distal wedge is absolutely contraindicated. If the infrabony defect is really, really deep, you may have to, consider extraction or a straight line gingivectomy and, leave it there. You may have to consider extraction and that would be the only modality. Now, apart from the zone of attached gingiva, there are a lot of anatomical so you have certain anatomic considerations that you need to take care of, like the lingual nerve, which is zone only, it goes deeper as it moves anteriorly. The internal oblique ridge with the mylohyoid muscle attachment, and in the maxillary tuberosity area, so we'll have the certain nerve endings of the median and the posterior palatine nerves, and a little posteriorly, we probably tensor bellae palatini muscle that you need to take care of. So, so it was Robinson in 1966 who, spoke about incisions and the distal wedge procedure. Now, only when limited amounts of keratinized gingiva is present and you need to gain access to an angular bony defects on the for the mandibular molars, incisions that will thin down the bulbous retromolar area and hitting straight down to bone. If the zone of keratinized gingiva, if it is if you have sufficient zone of keratinized gingiva, so you follow the zone. So suppose you have keratinized gingiva that moves to the buccal or to the lingual, your triangular incisions will vary accordingly. So So you have the internal bevel or the reverse bevel incision that is going to thin, undermine the flap and help gain access, followed by, now these will be extended labially as well as lingually, and this triangular wedge of tissue is removed, access to the bone is gained, and accordingly the area is debrided and then sutured up. For the maxillary molars, a slight different modification incisions that begin at the distalmost portion of the tooth. They can then be, so they extend up to the zone of keratinized gingiva. You have a transverse incision that is made at the distal end, and these incisions are then extended palatally as well as labially, and this tissue is removed, followed by debridement and closure. So having discussed all the classic periodontal flap surgical procedures, so it was, so in the year 2001, when microsurgery again took a good hold, and this paper is by Cortellini, and you could all go through it, where microsurgical approach to periodontal regeneration using the microscope and microsurgical series of microsurgical instruments. So I took up this paper because I thought that maximum number of patients, like, so you have a good sample size, about on here was that use of microsurgical approach was associated with a high ability to obtain primary closure of the tissues over barrier membranes. So especially in regenerative procedures, this was something that would hold promise. Similarly, in the year excuse me. So similarly, in the year 2009, the single flap approach with buccal access in the periodontal reconstructive procedure. So this paper was published by Trombelli et al. And they found that with this buccal single so you had substantial clinical attachment level gain and limited post-surgical recession, which was then, made it really useful in the regenerative procedures, especially the anterior areas, and where the osseous defects is limited probably to the labial or the buccal cortical plate. With the conventional periosteal releasing incision, in order to coronally advance the flap, especially for when we are doing grafting procedures like the GTR or the GBR. Jung et al. In the year 2014, so he modified the periosteal flap and the periosteal releasing and called it the modified periosteal fenestration technique. where in full thickness flap, so after the procedure of GBR, GTR was done, yeah, so in the apical area of this full thickness flap, a small incision without perforating the submucosa would allow release of the periosteum, and then this flap would be then, you know, pulled outwards and laterally in order to make it much more, you know, amenable to advance. One moment. More amenable to advance it over the area that we have, you know, formed our regeneration. So of course, along with GTR or GBR, these could be really, really useful. Then, with the advent of lasers, of course, laser known for effect, for having a high amount of repairability, and so in order to and allowing stimulation of wound healing. So with this objective, there are a couple of studies where in a laser is one moment. Most of the studies fail to evaluate a clinically significant superior result as far as the findings, that is PPD or CAL gain, was concerned with the help of laser as compared to conventional flap surgical techniques. So having discussed all of the flap surgical techniques, let's look at healing in short post flap surgery. So if you've done a flap surgery and it's been within the norms, not too traumatic, and you've achieved primary closure, so immediately after suturing, there is a blood clot, and that between the soft tissue wall and the tooth surface, with 1 to 3 days after flap surgery, where the epithelial cells begin to migrate from the periphery through and they stream over the area that has been operated. Minimal inflammatory response on close. You know, they are predominant in the zone of or the inflammatory phase that occurs. 1 week after surgery, you have an epithelial attachment to the root that has been already established, and the blood clot is now granulation issue. So slow swinging of the angiogenesis and the fibroblasts, they come into picture. Osteoblasts and bone formation will begin almost at differentiation is maximum seen between 4 to 7 days. So 2 weeks after surgery, you'll have collagen fibers which begin to appear and parallel to the tooth surface. Union of the flap here also is still weak, and that is why we really don't probe in so early. 1 month after surgery, a epithelialized gingival crevice with a well-defined epithelial attachment is present, and functional arrangement of the supra. You have osteoclastic resorption that reaches a peak at 4 to 6 days and then declines therein. So this results in loss of bone. So bone which is less than 2 millimeters definitely undergoes a lot of remodeling, and that is how areas whenever surgical re-entry has been done in a lot of studies, they have always found that bone stabilized. Healing post apically repositioned flap. So healing would occur by primary intention, especially if soft tissue coverage of alveolar bone has been obtained. Reduction of alveolar bone height resulting from resorption and thickness of bone. So that varies from site to site. And over a period of, a couple of months and years, there has been coronal growth of the connective tissue, which by Lang et al. Has been proposed to almost 1 to 3 millimeters. With modified Widman, in an area with deep infrabony lesion, some amount of bony repair. So you have you essentially have healing by long junctional epithelium with some amount of crestal bone resorption, some amount of bone repair that will depend on the nature of the bone defects. So you have 2-walled and 3-walled, which will show some amount of repair. We will look into the long-term treatment outcome. I have a slide for that. And some amount of soft tissue recession is evidenced. So what is the long-term treatment of our periodontal flap surgery? So here, what are the common parameters that were considered in order to evaluate the long-term outcomes were resolution of bleeding on probing, probing pocket depth reduction, cal change, the amount of gingival recession, and patient's overall response to treatment procedures. So there were two systematic reviews that I came across, and I would just like to summarize the findings from the same. So one was by Hades and Mayfield in 2002, and the other was by Milo in 2015. So definitely when surgical periodontal therapy was compared to non-surgical periodontal therapy, we achieve greater probing depths. Sites with pocket depths more than or equal to 7 millimeters exhibited cal gain. In molar tooth regions, the surgical approach definitely offered advantage over the non-surgical approach. And out here, so a mention of the critical probing depths. That concept was laid down by Linde et al. And which was 2.9 mm for the non-surgical treatment and around 4.2 mm for the surgical approach. So in the molars, definitely surgical approach offered advantage here. In the anterior region, it was about 6 to 7 mm. So difference between flap techniques, there was no significant difference per se, either in the short term nor in a long term outcome. Gingival recession was most pronounced when resective osseous surgery was entailed. Bone fill and angular defects was majorly seen in 2 or 3 walled. 1 wall defects hardly showed bone fill. An analysis of 523 angular defects by Lang in 2000, I'm sorry, yielded a weighted mean gain of 1.5 mm. So 1.5 mm gain in 2-walled and 3-walled angular defects was something that was proposed by Lang when he examined about 523 angular defects. And then this paper, the systematic review on a long-term effect of 4 surgical periodontal therapies and 1 non-surgical therapy by Mailoa et al. And the conclusions here are there for you all to see. Surgical therapy had significantly more clinical attachment loss than non-surgical in shallow probing depths. However, in moderate probing depths, the modified Widman had significantly more PD reduction than SRP, and there was significantly less cal gain with surgical therapy. In deeper probing depths, it was the osseous surgery that significantly gave higher probing depth reduction than SRP. So having understood the healing and the long-term treatment, clinical outcomes of different kinds of flap surgeries, just a quick understanding on what could be the complications. So at this point of time, so there are a lot of other topics that are hooked up to this topic. For example, the sutures and the suturing techniques, then the choice of antibiotics or antimicrobial therapy if you want to entail on those. So all of this are connected, but since we have to be in our time frame, is something that may not warrant a discussion right now. A little know-how on the complications. So general complications could be, yes, there could be bleeding. So here you ought to know what would be the causes of immediate post-operative bleeding, what is reactionary bleeding, when would there be delayed bleeding, so on and so forth, and how would you manage that. Swelling, which could be a inflammatory response to the procedure that you have performed leading to trismus. Swelling along with a lot of pain. So we need to, then evaluate what would be the cause of such a pain. Because of root hypersensitivity and post-operative pain is also a sequelae of periodontal surgery. And when you have extension of this inflammatory process into the periodontal ligament, that is when increased tooth mobility could also be an immediate complication. Failures of flap surgery. So I'm almost at the end of my presentation and would like to also mention that we must have a little know-how on what failures and need to anticipate that and avoid situations that could get us into one. So they could be pre-therapeutic, therapeutic, or the etiology could be post-therapeutic. So under pre-therapeutic, again, an improper, treatment plan, coming across, sudden morphological, anatomical aberrations like grooves or pearls, but being able to manage them, of course. Consideration of habits and trauma from occlusion like clenching and bruxism also are an important consideration, without which, probably your case could fail. Under therapeutics, improper asepsis, surgical technique which does not allow proper adaptation of the interdental tissue. So you have caused, say there is bone exposure and you have probably not given a dressing. If there has been over reflection of the flap or under reflection leading to limited access, and the whole objective of the surgery is abolished. And improper flap design. If a mucoperiosteal flap is going to be too high, highly raised coronally, or it will fall short of the margin. And if you're doing a regenerative surgery and there is inadequate covering of the bone graft or membrane exposure through incomplete debridement, overzealous tightening of sutures, which could lead to, sloughing and probably necrosis. So all of these could be possible causes of failure during your therapeutic, during the procedure. The nature, as we already discussed, so nature of your vertical releasing incisions, flap perforation if you're not careful with your internal bevel. Also designing the trapezoidal flap, so it should be wider at the apex, at the base, and not at the gingival marginal front. And not trying to avoid an overzealous attempt to, displace the flap which has not been given vertical incisions. And so trying to avoid tension, because a lot of tension would then also be suicidal for the life of the flap there. Under post-therapeutic causes, the most common cause would be a compromised patient compliance. So if you're not able to put your patient into a proper SPT program, you could classify the patient based on Marin's classification. And so if you are not able to, and if the patient is not really able to maintain, so long-term treatment outcomes are hugely compromised. Again, in the beveled flap, yes, one of the causes of failure could be to not know where the palatal artery, or to, overlook that, and that may, cause a lot of bleeding. So how much time? So I'm just, I think about time for me to wind up the topic. I conclude by saying that the main objective of periodontal surgery is to obtain a healthy and functionally aesthetic periodontium. All of the surgical techniques do increase accessibility to the root surface, making it possible to remove irritants, reduce, eliminate pockets, reshape soft and hard tissues in order to attain harmonious topography. And each of those techniques has its own indications, contraindications, limitations, so on and so forth. So as I've mentioned, a proper plan is needed before performing these procedures. With this, I would like to end my presentation, and I got this beautiful poem that was written in 1869, and how relevant is it to today's time? So this is timeless. When people stayed at home, read books, listened, rested, and lived in ignorant ways, and later on realized they found themselves, grieved for the dead, dreamed new visions, and completely healed the earth. So with this, I would like to end my presentation, hoping and praying that all of us, come out of this pandemic disease as fast as we can, and we get back to our practices and normal. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Roshni, for a wonderful lecture.
I'm on time, I think. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. There are some questions which students have put in chat box. So,
let me view that, sir.
Yeah, I'll just go through it. Yeah, the first question which they have put is, which sutures should be placed in apically displaced flap?
So in apically displaced flap, initially you need to stabilize the flap with the help of periosteal sutures. So once you have achieved that, then interdentally you could use interrupted sutures, like simple interrupted or a figure of 8.
Second is that, ma'am, can you please explain the incision for simplified papilla preservation again?
Simplified papilla preservation. So it is essentially an oblique incision from the mesiolabial. Say if you have 2 teeth in the anterior, say in the anterior region, so from the mesiolabial to the distopalatal of the adjacent one. So it will be an oblique incision, because this is commonly indicated in areas where the the gap between the two teeth is less than 2 millimeters, you cannot probably include the papilla or disclude a papilla. So this oblique incision is from the mesiolabial of one to the mesiopalatal of the other. I hope, I mean, I don't know how to draw it here and show it to you, but
Okay.
yeah.
Next is, ma'am, can you explain about the Wells Tell technique and its success?
So Wells Tell technique would not actually fall under the preview of the periodontal flap. I think it will be covered during regeneration. The whole technique will have to be explained. Probably you could email it to me and I'll share it with you.
Okay. The next is, how long can flap be kept open in oral cavity?
How long? So the knock has to be as quick as possible. How long as such, there is no such, I haven't, so you need to be quick with your surgical acumen, and it has to be closest. I mean, you have to be, you really cannot keep it open for hours and hours together. So there has to be a limited time before which, so this will definitely come with practice. Initially, of course, we take longer time, but there's no specific article. If there are seniors who could share it, I would be, glad to know myself. No particular time frame that, beyond which there could be osseous necrosis or a sequestrum that will form vis-a-vis, before which there is gain of osseous repair or regeneration. So
Then
yeah,
someone has asked the difference
as
between,
quick as possible, you need to close.
difference between beveled flap, envelope flap, and Kirkland flap.
Beveled flap, you mean the one that is put forth by Friedman? Okay. Envelope flap. Envelope flap is a flap that encompasses only horizontal incisions. And what was the third one? So beveled, beveled flap is a flap which is totally, beveled and envelope flap both incorporate horizontal incisions only. Beveled an envelope flap is a flap that will have those three incisions, no? The three horizontal incisions. So the internal bevel, the clavicular, and the interdental. The beveled flap by Friedman includes the clavicular incision, after which there is reflection. There's a lot of scribbling on this. And then when the flap is placed back on the bone, that is when the this is given, the beveled incision given. What was the third one that you said, Dr. Neeraj? So
Yeah,
beveled,
beveled, envelope, and Kirkland.
and Kirkland incorporates the classic intraclavicular, because according to him, and there were studies done by, again, Lang et al., who tried to compare removal of inflamed connective tissue, that is through the internal bevel, and use of intraclavicular, and did not find significant difference between the same.
Okay. Then there's a difference between pocket elimination and pocket reduction.
So yes, with our better understanding of the pathogenesis of periodontal disease, we now know that it was not only pocket depth that should have been the criteria, but a pocket that is having more. So since according to Armitage 1999, this is a site-specific disease. So so areas which have active disease process. So since it's sites.
Hello? Hello? Hello?
Hello, Dr. Neeraj.
Yeah. Now you're audible.
Okay. So along with pocket depth, the nature of the activity of the disease in the pocket. So whether it's active currently, or is it in a phase of remission and is passive, or along with bleeding on probing and clinical attachment levels. So there were a lot of, so with our improved of periodontal disease, it was not only pocket depth, but it was these other criteria which were also important clinical outcomes. So that is how from pocket elimination, slowly we moved to pocket depth reduction. Slowly we also considered criteria like cal gains, less bleeding on probing, so on and so forth.
Then someone has asked a predicted amount of bone loss expected after flap surgery.
Predictable amount of bone loss. So as I said, there is this study. I'm not able to actually locate the author, but any kind of bone that is less than 2 millimeters. So we need about 2 millimeters of thickness of bone in order to maintain the levels of the osseous level per se. So if it is something less than that, it is going to be amenable to resorption once it is exposed. So because of the regional accelerator phenomena, the amount of bone reduction. So it will all depend on the nature of the osseous defect. It will depend on the thickness of the alveolar bone. It's for sure that there may be some amount of repair and regeneration with 2-walled and 3-walled defects. I mentioned a study which has included about 500 plus osseous defects, and where the gain has been around a weighted mean of 1.5 millimeters. But this is limited to 2 and 3-walled defects. With 1-walled defect, definitely there is no chance, and we'll have to resort to resective osseous surgery because there is no gain that has been. So loss will depend on a lot of factors: the nature of the defect, kind of thickness of alveolar bone, so on and so forth.
Okay. And there is a question about is apically repositioned flap and apically displaced flap same?
Yes, repositioning means displacing it. Yes.
Okay. Then yeah, after periodontal surgery, what is the ideal time to probing?
That you all should all the PGs. So it is only post 3 weeks, so the 4th week onwards that we would probably think about. So so around after 4 weeks, yes.
Okay. Then there is a query.
And that is related to the healing. Okay, I just wanted to complete that. Yes, yes, Dr. Neeraj.
Where do we place the flap after OFD level with relation to tooth and alveolar bone? That basically depends upon
where
which.
do we place the flap, sir?
After open flap debridement.
So open flap. So periodontal surgery is essentially open flap debridement.
Yes.
So where do you place the flap? Is it?
Yeah, yeah.
On the objective of the surgery, or which surgery you're performing, right?
Correct.
All in all, we desire complete closure of the soft tissue without bone being exposed to the oral cavity. And so if you have not done an osseous resection or any kind of osseous remodeling, you will have to, and if you don't desire displacement at all, you will place it back because you want to have primary closure. And especially in the anterior region, the lesser the amount of tissue destruction and the lesser the amount of gingival recession, the better it is. So yes, you will look at the CEJ or adjacent teeth. You will so it will all depend on the nature of the flap surgery that you are performing, the area where you're doing it, what is the objective, whether you are going to reduce bone or no, so on and so forth.
Okay. What is the difference between healthy granulation tissue and diseased granulation tissue or unhealthy?
Okay. Granulation tissue per se, there have been a lot of, there's always been a lot of discussion here. Some papers say that granulation tissue majorly has to, since it contains unattached plaque and a lot of periodontopathic bacteria, should be removed. No granulation tissue should be left behind. Also, all in all, because when you are leaving granulation tissue behind, there is always going to be bleeding, which will affect the visibility of flakes of calculus being attached onto the tooth or the tooth surface. If you have to gain access and to understand the nature of the osseous defect that you are going to envision to regenerate, you will have to remove granule. But there are again 1 or 2 papers that have spoken about stem cells being present to some extent in granulation tissue. Carranza always mentions that if you have removed majorly granulation tissue, these terminologies are thoda sa infected. So call it granulation tissue, infected and healthy. Healthy would come only while you are in the healing phase, no? When you have the granulation phase. So that is a different thing altogether. When you're talking about granulation tissue that you have, reflected the flap and experienced. So yeah, you could remove it for these reasons. And all in all, Carranza also mentioned that if you are going to leave behind, have you, in case you have removed entire calculus, and not calculus, if you leave behind little portions of granulation tissue, it is the host response that will take care of it.
There are many, actually more than 100 questions there. So I request all the students, if possible, to write and get the answers, because it's very difficult to answer all the questions now. We have taken some
I think you all can note down my email ID and probably.
You can just share in chat box. Yeah, chat box.
I'll do that.
Yeah, so that whatever questions they have, they can put forth to you and their queries will be solved.
Sure. So my email ID. Do we have a time frame, Dr. Neeraj?
We have 10 more minutes we can have. If you want to clarify something, you can just go through the chat box and just see.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Yeah, just go through, and some important points, if you still want to cover, you can cover. No problem.
Sure.
There are questions in chat box.
So before that, before we end, and so I would like to thank the Indian Society of Periodontology to having given me this this chance to share my my little know-how on periodontal flap surgeries. Once again, a huge shout out to Honorable President Ma'am, Secretary Sir, all the office members, and the entire team of executive committee members. Thank you so much.
Are you able to see the chat box?
I'm able to see, but sir, all I can see is thank you. I'm not having.
So go to around 11.
Okay, pocket elimination, pocket reduction is something that I spoke on.
Yeah.
And then
from there onwards, just
periodontal. What will be the ideal time to probe? How many days can it be probed? Procedures come under pocket elimination. Pocket elimination and pocket reduction. So what all procedures come under pocket elimination? The original Widman technique, cyclically displaced flap, these come under pocket elimination. The others are essentially pocket reduction. Undisplaced flap is also pocket elimination. I'm sorry. Can you explain the incision for simplified papilla? Sir, I think we have got most
of things you have covered. That's what I thought, that you only go through.
Yes,
so
yes, I will do
to answer, or they are not covered.
Sure. And I have shared my email ID. So anyone having any kind of doubts, please email it to me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
So this will end the meeting here. Thank you very much, all the life members and associate members of ISP for participating in this meeting. And our apologies that many of the members were left out because of limitation of 500 members. So we'll definitely look into it. And thank you very much. And thank you, our opening batsman, Dr. Roshni, for a wonderful lecture.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Neeraj. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.